You switched to whole grain bread years ago, maybe a decade ago, maybe longer. Your doctor told you to. The American Diabetes Association told you to. The label on the package told you to. It says, whole grain, right there, on the front, in big, confident letters. And you believed it. I need you to hear this next part carefully. A meta-analysis covering 13 separate clinical studies found that the average glycemic index of bread made from whole wheat flour and bread made from white refined flour was statistically identical. Both scored around 71. That puts them in the same category, high glycemic, the same category as a candy bar. Surprised? Let me say that differently so it really lands. The bread you've been choosing on purpose to protect your blood sugar, your body can't tell the difference. Not at the cellular level. Not where it matters. And if you're over 60, if your insulin sensitivity is already declining by the year, that bread is doing damage you can't feel. Not yet. But it's happening. Every morning, every sandwich, every single slice. Now, I'm not telling you to stop eating bread. That's not what this is. What I'm going to do is rank 7 types of bread, the ones you actually see at the grocery store, from the absolute worst for your blood sugar to the one that clinical research shows can actually lower your glucose response. Worst to best. No guesswork, just data. And bread number 1 on this list doesn't just avoid spiking your blood sugar. There's evidence it actively repairs the way your body handles insulin. But first, you need to understand something about bread that almost nobody explains correctly. Because until you understand this one thing, the labels will keep lying to you. Drop a comment right now that says, I deserve the truth, if you believe health information should be free and accessible to everyone. And share this with any senior who still trusts the label on their bread. The only people who don't want you to see this are the companies printing those labels. Here's the thing that unlocks everything. When people hear whole grain, they picture a grain like a whole kernel of wheat. The bran on the outside, the germ in the middle, the starchy endosperm packed inside, all of it intact, the way nature designed it. And that image is the reason you trust the bread. But here's what happens at the factory, and I mean virtually every commercial bread factory in the United States. That whole grain kernel goes into a roller mill, not a stone mill, not the kind your grandmother would recognize. A high-speed industrial roller mill that pulverizes every part of that grain bran, germ, endosperm into a powder so fine that the particle size drops below 150 micrometers. Why does that matter? Because at that particle size, the brantha part that's supposed to slow down digestion has been shattered into fragments so tiny that your digestive enzymes blow right past it. There's no physical barrier left. The starch is completely exposed. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a log cabin, solid walls. Wind can't get through. That's an intact grain kernel. Your digestive enzymes have to work slowly from the outside in. They can't access all the starch at once. So your blood sugar rises gradually, slowly, the way it's supposed to. Now take that same log cabin and run it through a wood chipper. You've still got all the same materials. Every piece of wood is still there. The label could honestly say, contains 100% log cabin, but it's not a cabin anymore. It's a pile of sawdust, and the wind goes right through. That's whole wheat flour. Same ingredients. Completely different metabolic response. A research team found that bread made from coarsely cracked wheat, where the grain particles are larger than 2 millimeter shad, a glycemic index 20 to 30 points lower than bread made from the exact same wheat ground into fine flour, same grain, same fiber content, same nutrition label. Completely different effect on your blood sugar. That's not a small difference. That's the difference between a food that protects you and a food that's silently damaging your blood vessels twice a day. Now here's where it gets, honestly, a little infuriating. The FDA requires that bread labeled whole wheat must use 100% whole wheat flour. That sounds good, but the FDA does not regulate how finely that flour is milled. You could pulverize it into dust. You could make it as refined as white flour in terms of particle size. As long as the bran and germ started out in the mix, it qualifies. So a bread company can take whole wheat flour that behaves metabolically identical to white flour Slap whole grain on the front of the package, color the bread brown with molasses or caramel color, and sell it to you as a health food. And here's the part that I don't know how to say without sounding harsh, but this is happening right now in your pantry. Probably. If you pick up your bread, the one in your kitchen, and flip it over, and the crumb looks smooth and uniform, with no visible grain pieces, no rough texture, no kernels or seeds you can actually see embedded in the bread, then the grain has been milled too fine to slow down your digestion. Period. The label might say, whole grain. The color might be brown. But your body doesn't read labels. Your body responds to particle size, to structure, to how fast enzymes can access the starch. And for most commercial whole grain breads on the American market, that access is immediate, within minutes, almost identical to white bread. Researchers at the Weizmann Institute of Science ran a randomized crossover trial where they fed people either traditional sourdough whole grain bread or industrial white bread. They expected the whole grain bread to produce clearly better blood sugar results. It didn't. No significant difference across the whole group. And here's the surprising part. Some people actually spiked higher on the whole grain bread than the white bread. The response was completely individual. So the idea that whole grain is always better for blood sugar, research says it's more complicated than the label wants you to believe. Now you understand the mechanism. Now you know why the label alone isn't enough. Let's get into the ranking 7 breads, worst to best. I'm scoring each one on 3 things: glycemic impact, hidden ingredients, and whether it's genuinely protective or just pretending to be. Starting with the worst, and this one's going to sting because it's one of the most popular breads in America. Honey wheat bread. You see it everywhere. The packaging is warm, golden, wholesome looking. Words like honey, wheat, and natural front and center. Here's the problem. Flip it over. Look at the ingredient list. Most honey wheat bread sand, I mean the major national brands list, enriched wheat flour as the first ingredient, not whole wheat flour. Enriched flour is white flour with some vitamins sprinkled back in after the milling process stripped them out. The wrong reason to avoid it is because it has honey in it. People hear honey and think sugar. And yes, honey is sugar, but a tablespoon of honey isn't what's destroying your blood sugar here. The real reason, the one nobody tells you, is the base flour. Enriched wheat flour has a glycemic index that sits right around 73 to 75. That's virtually identical to pure white bread. And when you combine that with honey and often high fructose corn syrup, which many of these brands also include, you're looking at a bread that spikes blood sugar faster and harder than a plain white slice. But people buy it because it says wheat on the label, and they feel like they're making a healthy choice. Here's my take. Honey wheat bread is marketing dressed up as nutrition. It's designed to make you feel good at the checkout line, not at the cellular level. If this bread is in your kitchen right now, I'm not going to yell at you. You were lied to. But now you know. And that means starting tomorrow, you can make a different choice. Score: 2 out of 10. Essentially, white bread with a costume on. Number 6. And this is the big one, the bread most people switch to on their doctor's advice. Standard commercial whole wheat bread. The kind you grab off the shelf at the grocery store. Major brands with 100% whole wheat stamped on the front. The wrong reason people think this is healthy is the fiber content. And yeah, whole wheat bread does have more fiber than white bread, about 2 to 3 grams per slice compared to less than 1 gram. That sounds meaningful, but here's the real reason. It's still a problem. Remember what we talked about earlier, the milling. Commercial whole wheat bread is made from whole wheat flour that has been roller milled into a powder with the exact same particle size as white flour. The fiber is there chemically, but it's been shattered into particles too small to physically slow digestion. The research confirms this. The glycemic index of most commercial whole wheat bread lands around 71 to 74. Standard white bread? About 73 to 75. The difference between them is so small that researchers have called it clinically insignificant. One study in aging clinical and experimental research put it bluntly. The GI for a serving of white wheat flour bread was 71. The GI for a serving of whole wheat flour bread was also 71. Identical numbers, same metabolic impact. And in people with diabetes specifically, the research is even more concerning. A study published in Diabetic Medicine found that the blood glucose response areas after wholemeal bread and white bread were virtually the same, and both were significantly higher than bread made with intact or coarsely cracked grains. So here's the uncomfortable truth. When your doctor said, switch to whole wheat, the advice wasn't wrong in theory. The problem is that the bread industry took that advice and turned it into a label that means almost nothing in practice. You bought the right idea. You were just sold the wrong product. Score, 3 out of 10. Better nutrition profile than white bread, but same blood sugar impact, and that's the part that matters after 60. Number 5. Multigrain. This is interesting because multigrain bread sounds even healthier than whole wheat. Multiple grains, more variety, more nutrients, that's the pitch. And here's where the label deception gets really clever. Multigrain simply means the bread contains more than one type of grain. It does not mean those grains are whole. You can make a multigrain bread from 3 different refined flours, and it still qualifies for the label. The wrong reason people trust multigrain bread is the word multi. It triggers a mental shortcut. More grains equals more health. It sounds like abundance, like your body is getting a buffet of nutrients. The real reason it's a problem, if the grains are refined and in most commercial multigrain breads, you're eating multiple sources of rapidly digestible starch, all hitting your bloodstream at once. Data shows that multigrain bread containing refined flour has a glycemic index around 66. That's technically better than white bread, but it's still in the medium to high range. And research shows that for people over 60 with reduced insulin sensitivity, even medium GI foods can trigger significant glucose elevations. But here's where multigrain bread can actually be a decent choice if, and this is a big if every grain listed on the ingredient label says whole in front of it. Whole wheat, whole rye, whole oat. If those words are there and the flour is coarsely ground, a multigrain bread can score as low as 41 on the glycemic index. The gap between 66 and 41 is enormous. That's the difference between a food that hurts you and a food that helps you. So, multigrain bread isn't automatically bad, but you have to read every single grain on that ingredient list. If even one of them is refined, the bread is compromised. Score: 4 out of 10 if refined grains are present, 7 out of 10 if all grains are verified whole and coarsely processed. Number 4, and this might surprise you, whole wheat pita bread. People assume pita is healthier because it's thinnerless bread. Less impact. Simple math, right? Not exactly. The wrong reason people think pita is safe is portion size. Yes, a pita is smaller than 2 slices of sandwich bread, but the flour in commercial pita is often milled extremely fine to achieve that thin, flexible texture. And the thinner the bread, the more surface area is exposed to your digestive enzymes at once. The real reason it's problematic after 60, most commercial whole wheat pitas have a glycemic index in the mid to high 60s. And because they're flat and thin, people tend to eat them fast, no chewing resistance. You tear off a piece, dip it in hummus, and it's gone. Speed of eating matters here. When food hits your stomach quickly, the glucose surge arrives faster. Your pancreas has to respond faster. And after 60, that rapid response system is already slowing down. Now, there's a wrinkle here. Pita served with protein and fat like hummus, grilled chicken or olive oil doughs slow the glucose response significantly. So it's not the pita alone that's the issue. It's the pita eaten on its own, or the pita with just vegetables, or the pita used as a scoop for more carbs. If you love pita bread, I'm not asking you to give it up entirely, but I am asking you to never eat it alone. Always pair it with protein and fat, and ideally look for pitas made with visible grains or seeds in the dough-not smooth, uniform pita. Score: 5 out of 10. Manageable with proper pairing. Dangerous alone. Number 3, and now we're crossing into territory where the bread actually starts helping you. Sprouted grain bread. Brands like Ezekiel bread are the most well-known version. Here's why this bread is fundamentally different from everything we've talked about so far. Sprouted grain bread isn't made from flour at all. It's made from whole grain kernels that have been allowed to sprout, meaning the seed begins to germinate. And then the sprouts are mashed into a dough and baked. No milling, no pulverizing. The grain structure stays partially intact. The wrong reason people think sprouted bread is healthy is because it sounds natural or organic or raw. Those are marketing words. The real reason it's better for your blood sugar. The sprouting process changes the starch itself. During germination, enzymes within the grain begin converting some of the starch into simpler sugars that the growing plant would use for energy. But here's the key. This process also increases resistant starch content and activates enzyme inhibitors that slow down how fast your body can break down the remaining starch. The glycemic index of sprouted grain bread, like Ezekiel bread, comes in around 36 to the mid-50s, depending on the variety. Compare that to 71 for commercial whole wheat. That's a massive difference. Butane, this is important. Not all sprouted grain breads are created equal. Some brands add refined flour to the mix. Some add sweeteners. You still have to read the label. Look for a brand where the first ingredient says sprouted, something sprouted wheat, sprouted barley, sprouted lentils. If flour appears anywhere in the top 3 ingredients, it's compromised. One more thing about sprouted bread that matters specifically for seniors. Sprouting increases the bioavailability of minerals like zinc, iron, and magnesium. After 60, your ability to absorb these minerals from food declines. So sprouted grain bread isn't just neutral, it's actively helping your body access nutrients that other breads lock away. Score: 7.5 out of 10. Genuinely protective. Just check the label. Number 2, and this one flies completely under the radar. True pumpernickel bread. Not the pumpernickel you see in most American grocery stores. That's usually just regular rye bread with cocoa powder or molasses added for color. I mean the traditional German-style pumpernickel that's baked for 16 to 24 hours at low temperature. The wrong reason people avoid pumpernickel is the taste. It's dense, it's dark, it's heavy. It doesn't taste like the bread most Americans grew up with. The real reason you should pay attention to it, it has one of the lowest glycemic indices of any bread ever tested. Published data puts traditional pumpernickel somewhere between 41 and 46 on the glycemic index scale. That's lower than most fruit. Why? 2 reasons. First, traditional pumpernickel uses coarsely cracked rye kernels, not fine flour. The grain particles are large enough to physically resist your digestive enzymes. Second, the long, slow baking process creates resistant starch that your small intestine literally cannot break down. It passes through to your large intestine where gut bacteria ferment it. So, instead of spiking your blood sugar, it feeds your microbiome. A study looking at diabetic patients found that the blood glucose response after coarsely ground rye bread was significantly lower than after both white bread and standard wholemeal wheat bread. The rye structure itself seems to slow glucose absorption through multiple mechanisms. And for seniors specifically, rye bread has been associated with lower postprandial insulin responses compared to wheat bread. That matters because after 60, your pancreas is already working harder to produce enough insulin. Anything that reduces the insulin burden protects your pancreas long term. The challenge: true pumpernickel is hard to find in most American supermarkets. You might need to visit a European bakery or look for it in the international aisle or order it online. But if you can find it, this bread is genuinely therapeutic. Score: 8.5 out of 10. One of the most blood sugar-friendly breads in existence. And now, number 1, the best bread for blood sugar after 60. I know some of you saw this coming, but I don't think you know why. Traditional sourdough bread. Not the sourdough you find at Subway. Not the soft, fluffy sourdough at the supermarket that's really just white bread with a tangy flavor added. I'm talking about real sourdough, made with a natural starter culture that ferments over 12 to 24 hours. The wrong reason people think sourdough is healthier is the taste, the tang. They assume the sour flavor means something. It does, but not for the reason they think. The real reason sourdough protects your blood sugar is the fermentation process itself. During long fermentation, lactic acid bacteria produce organic acids primarily, lactic acid and acetic acid. These acids do something remarkable inside your body. They slow gastric emptying. That means food moves through your stomach more slowly, which means glucose enters your bloodstream more gradually, which means your pancreas doesn't have to dump insulin all at once. The glycemic index of properly fermented sourdough bread sits around 48 to 54. Some studies show it even lower in the mid-40s. Compare that to 71 for commercial whole wheat. But here's the part that really matters for seniors. A clinical study published in Acta Diabetologica looked at subjects with impaired glucose tolerance people in the pre-diabetic range. They found that meals containing sourdough bread produced significantly lower blood glucose responses and significantly lower insulin responses compared to meals with standard yeast-leavened bread. The sourdough bread didn't just avoid spiking blood sugar. It required less insulin to process. That means less pancreatic strain, less beta cell exhaustion, less progression toward full diabetes. Another study found that white wheat bread caused 45.5% more insulin secretion and nearly 10% higher blood sugar at 1 hour compared to sourdough whole grain bread, not just in diabetic patients, but in healthy people too. Now, here's the caveat. Sourdough only works if the fermentation is real and prolonged. A lot of commercial bakeries use a shortcut. They add vinegar or citric acid to mimic the sour flavor without the actual long fermentation. That gives you the taste, but none of the metabolic benefits. How do you tell the difference? Real sourdough has a short ingredient list: flour, water, salt, starter culture. If you see yeast listed as an ingredient alongside the starter, the fermentation was probably shortened. And the very best option, whole grain sourdough made from coarsely milled flour. That gives you the intact grain structure, plus the organic acid protection, a double layer of defense. Score: 9.5 out of 10. The closest thing to bread that actively heals your metabolism. Let me catch you before you make a mistake. Because even if you switch to the right bread oven, if you go buy sourdough or pumpernickel or sprouted grain tomorrow, can cancel out every benefit by combining it with the wrong foods. And I see people do this every single day. Mistake number 1. Bread with fruit juice at breakfast. Here's what happens. The bread gives you a moderate glucose rise, let's say a 30-point bump. The fruit juice adds another 40 to 50 points on top of that. Your total postprandial spike goes from manageable to dangerous. And for someone over 60 with declining insulin sensitivity, that combined spike can stay elevated for 3 to 4 hours. Never pair bread with fruit juice. If you want fruit with your bread, eat a whole fruit and apple, some berries. The fiber in whole fruit slows absorption. Juice has zero fiber. It's a sugar delivery system. Mistake number 2. Bread with jam or honey as the first thing you eat. This is about meal sequencing. If the very first thing that enters your stomach in the morning is bread with something sweet on it, there's no protein or fat in there yet to slow down digestion. The glucose surge hits fast. Your pancreas panics. Eat protein first, even just a few bites of egg, or a piece of cheese, or a spoonful of nut butter. Give your stomach something that slows gastric emptying before the bread arrives. Research shows that eating protein and fat before carbohydrates can reduce the glucose spike from the same meal by 30 to 40%. Mistake number 3. Toast with margarine. This one's insidious because it feels harmless. Margarine is often marketed as heart-healthy, but many margarines contain seed oil, soybean oil, canola oil, corn oil that promote inflammation, and chronic low-grade inflammation worsens insulin resistance over time. So you might get a small glucose benefit from the fat slowing digestion, but you're creating a longer-term metabolic problem underneath. Switch to real butter, extra virgin olive oil, or avocado. These fats slow glucose absorption without the inflammatory cost. Mistake number 4. Eating bread late at night. This connects to what happens to your blood sugar while you sleep. When you eat bread after 7 or 8 p.m., The glucose enters your bloodstream at a time when your body's insulin sensitivity is already at its lowest. Your circadian rhythm is winding down. Your muscles aren't as active. Your cells aren't as hungry for glucose. The result, that bread spike lingers. It carries into your overnight hours, and by the time your liver starts its natural glucose dump at 3 or 4 a.m., your baseline is already elevated. You wake up with a fasting glucose number that makes no sense. If you're going to eat bread, eat it at lunch. Your insulin sensitivity peaks in the early afternoon. That's when your body handles carbohydrates most efficiently. I just gave you a lot of information. Let me make this simple 3 steps you can start today, not next week. Step 1. Go to your kitchen. Pick up the bread you currently eat. Flip it over. Read the first ingredient. If it says enriched wheat flour or wheat flour, without the word whole, that bread is white bread in disguise. Replace it. Step 2. When you buy your next loaf of bread, look at the bread itself, not the label. The bread. Can you see visible grain pieces, seeds, a dense, coarse texture? If it looks smooth and uniform like a slice of Wonder Bread, but brown, put it back. Step 3. If you can find sourdough made from whole grain flour with a short ingredient list and no added yeast, buy that. If you can't find it, sprouted grain bread like Ezekiel is your next best option. And if you can't find either of those, true pumpernickel from a European bakery or online is the third choice. 1 change, 1 loaf. 3 days of lower glucose readings. You don't have to overhaul your entire diet. You don't have to give up bread. You just have to stop trusting the label and start trusting the structure. Now, before you got this video covered, what happens during the day, what bread to eat, how to pair it, when to time it. But there's a question most people over 60 never think to ask, and it's the one that might matter the most. What happens at night? Because for most adults over 60, the nighttime hours are when the real damage happens. Your liver, your cortisol, your circadian rhythm, they all shift while you sleep. And those shifts can undo an entire day of good choices. That's exactly why I created the Midnight Insulin Trap. It walks you through what changes inside your body after 60, why your morning numbers are high even when you eat perfectly during the day, and how to build a simple nighttime system food timing, meal structure, a 7-day reset you can start tonight. The link is below this video. I think you'll find it answers the questions your doctor doesn't have time to explain.